Agents employed today to manage large events throughout the world are usually based on United Kingdom regulations because the United Kingdom regulations are seen as the standard bearers. They're the standard we should all aspire to in the design of stadia and the control of patrons entering and leaving stadia in a safe manner. These regulations in the United Kingdom were unfortunately bought at some cost because it was the experience of disasters, mostly in soccer stadia, that prompted the authorities in the United Kingdom to come up with more stringent health and safety standards and more stringent laws therein. Two of the disasters are in living memory: the Hillsborough disaster in 1998 and the Bradford City fire in 1985. These two disasters are examples of a lack of leadership. And while most would point to the officers in charge on the day, be the fire officers, ambulance officers, or police officers, I would contend that there was a lack of leadership shown far further down the ranks among stewards and the ordinary constable in these events. And I believe they could have been prevented if common sense had prevailed and if people had used their own initiative. In Hillsborough, the problem arose when pens 3 and 4 became dangerously full well before the match started. Pens 3 and 4 were accessed by a tunnel under the stand. This was at a 1 and 6 gradient. And naturally, people were attracted to this entrance because they could see the pitch through the tunnel. When a gate was opened to alleviate a crush outside the grounds, people migrated towards this tunnel and proceeded down the tunnel. Once they were set on that course, they couldn't turn back. There was no escape for them, and there was no escape for the supporters in front of them who occupied the pens because the pens were constructed not to allow people onto the pitch or to either side of them. A barrier snapped, and the grossly overcrowded pens accounted for the deaths of 96 people who died through asphyxiation. In previous years, that tunnel would have been blocked off once the pens were full. So why wasn't the tunnel blocked off in 1998? That's the $6 million question. The finger is often pointed at the police commander who was 2 weeks into the job and had little or no experience of a semi-final clash that this was. But I would ask, where were the seasoned policemen who had attended the events over the decade? Surely there were policemen who had been there the year before who would have seen the tactic employed whereby the tunnel was blocked off. Why didn't these ordinary constables talk to each other and decide to block off the tunnel once they realised that pens 3 and 4 were dangerously full? Why didn't stewards on duty on the day ask the police to block off the tunnel as they had done in former years? It's incredible that it wasn't done. And it really is incredible that these people would now point the finger at a commanding officer who obviously had lost control. There's no doubt about that. I think he admits that himself. But why, oh why, couldn't ordinary people, experienced constables, experienced stewards, use their own initiative and block off that tunnel? 8 or 10 of them would have sufficed. Because patrons weren't going to argue with them. They wanted to see the match. They would have immediately gone to the left or the right to occupy the terraces that were only at 50% capacity on the day. But that didn't happen. And that's lack of leadership at all ranks. Why was the ambulance response so late, so inadequate? It is estimated that 42 ambulances were parked on or near the ground when the call came for them. On the day, the first ambulance to appear at the Leppings Lane end, where the tragedy happened, was a voluntary ambulance, a St. John's ambulance. And for a long time, that was the only ambulance that was on the pitch. Eventually, two other ambulances, NHS ambulances, joined that solitary St. John's ambulance. But what was needed on the day was for 42 ambulances to be parked on that pitch, because that's the scale of the disaster that was unfolding. And it is now known that as many people, up to 40 people, could have been saved had they received medical attention in time, and had there been medical equipment such as oxygen available to them in time. Those that did show leadership on the day were the ordinary supporters who tore down advertising hoardings to use as makeshift stretchers in order to carry the dead and dying away. But they had no medical training to render any more assistance, and people, as bad as things were, needlessly died because, again, a lack of initiative by individuals, crew members of these ambulances. What were they afraid of? Why didn't they enter that pitch? In Bradford, patrons were accommodated in a timber stand. It had served them for a long time, and it was about to be replaced. Obviously, after the fire, it took only 4 minutes for that stand to burn to the ground, and after the fire, timber stands, for obvious reasons, were banned by the English FA. But that really isn't the full story. Underneath the seating of that timber stand, rubbish was allowed to accumulate over months, perhaps years. It was a covered stand, so this rubbish was drying out with each passing week, with each passing wind. A fire officer in the region had alerted the directors to the fact that this accumulation of rubbish was in fact a fire hazard. I wonder, did it really take a fire officer to point that out? Should the caretaker, should the directors, should the stewards not have realised that an accumulation of rubbish under a timber stand was a fire hazard, especially at a time when it was quite common for people to light up cigarettes during a match? A discarded butt onto a concrete or earthen floor would simply burn itself out. A discarded butt onto a pile of accumulated rubbish that was drying out for months, if not years, created an inferno, as happened on the day. Of course, leadership was lacking also when exits were blocked, and that's where 57 people lost their lives in the area where they couldn't get out. In contrast to Hillsborough, the police on duty in Valley Parade, the Bradford City Ground, showed excellent leadership once that fire took hold. They risked life and limb to clear the stand, and undoubtedly more people would have perished but for their selflessness and their heroism. One officer described how the coat melted off his back, such was the intensity of the heat. Some people died in horrific circumstances. Leadership in all walks of life cannot be confined to those of rank. Leadership has to be displayed by everyone in an organisation. If only someone took the initiative. We must clear out that rubbish. We must clean out that stand. Just do it. We must block off that entrance. It must be done now. It has to be done. Just do it. Don't wait for someone else to tell you. Just do it. That's what leadership is about. The consequences of lack of leadership at any level are plain to be seen.